The world does not stop for a transaction, yet, in the heart of the individual, time itself seems to hold its breath. Consider the neon-lit hum of a city center at dusk. A woman stands at a checkout counter, her fingers hovering over a digital terminal. The store is vibrant, teeming with the quiet industry of commerce. But inside her, a sudden, sharp winter descends. It is a paradox of modern existence. The act of exchange is meant to be a bridge, a symbol of value moving from one hand to another. Yet it has become an act of profound, silent violence against the self. Before the receipt ever prints, before the transaction is even finalized by the unseen pulse of a server, the body has already registered a verdict. There is a tightening, imperceptible to the clerk, but tectonic to the soul. A stomach muscles recoil, as if shielding a vital organ. A jaw pivots into a rigid, defensive lock. The breath, that essential, rhythmic reminder of life, catches in the throat, becoming shallow and jagged. This is the ritual of the modern age. It is not merely the shifting of numbers, it is a somatic collision. For millions, the simple, necessary motion of paying for bread, for shelter, for the tools of their trade, is performed with the physical posture of a person bracing for a blow. The shoulders rise toward the ears, creating a cage of tension. The skin grows cool. The eyes dart, searching for a phantom threat. This reaction is the architecture of a ghost, the residue of ancient survival instincts now weaponized against one's own prosperity. It is a silent, unacknowledged tragedy, a profound disconnect where the act of living is treated as an act of dying. We watch her, this woman, and we see not a shopper, but a soldier caught in an eternal, imagined war against her own survival. To understand why the body treats a credit card swipe like a skirmish, one must peel back the layers of the subconscious, where money has been conflated with vitality itself. We must ask, why does the body contract? The answer lies in the recursive loop of human conditioning. The body contracts because, in the deep strata of the nervous system, money is no longer a tool, it is perceived as the source of life. When the source is seen as finite, every movement of that source is interpreted as a potential depletion. We are caught in a recursive trap. I spend, therefore I lose. I lose, therefore I am less. I am less, therefore I am in danger. Consider the how of this mechanism. How does this become a permanent state? It is reinforced by the narrative of scarcity that permeates the collective unconscious. From a philosophical perspective, we have severed the link between the symbol of value and the infinite nature of the source. We have mistaken the riverbed for the water. When we watch money leave our hands, we are not looking at circulation, we are looking at a funeral. The psychological devastation is absolute because it is silent. We do not name it, we simply carry it in our posture. But why does the subconscious insist on this danger? Because the subconscious is a guardian, not a philosopher. It prioritizes the preservation of the current state above all else. If it has been trained through generations of anxiety and the harsh lessons of survival that money moving means danger, it will trigger the survival response at every opportunity. It is a feedback loop of biological protection gone awry. We are protecting ourselves from the very flow that sustains us. We treat the currency of exchange as if it were the lifeblood, and every payment as a hemorrhage. To break this, we must realize that the contraction is not a reality, it is a suggestion. The body is telling the truth about the belief, not the truth about the world. The belief is, I am being diminished. The reality, however, is a vast, interconnected, and infinite system of circulation. The contraction is the mechanism of the ego trying to solidify the liquid, trying to stop the flow to ensure safety, thereby ensuring the very stagnation it seeks to avoid. In the valley of Oakhaven, there lived a man named Silas, who was known as the keeper of the most pristine storehouse in the region. Silas possessed a peculiar obsession. He viewed every object, every grain of wheat, and every coin as a soldier in his personal army. When the time came to trade, to exchange his store for the wool of the mountain people or the medicine of the healers, Silas did not see an opportunity for growth. He saw a loss of territory. Every time Silas handed over a coin, he felt a phantom pain. As if he were cutting off a finger, he would stand in his storehouse, calculating the decreasing stack of gold, his breath hitching, his hands trembling. He told himself he was being careful, that he was preserving his future. But the villagers noticed that as Silas's pile of gold grew more stagnant, the storehouse itself began to wither. The roof leaked because he refused to pay the mender. The grain went stale because he feared the cost of transport to better markets. Silas was so terrified of the act of depletion that he stopped the act of circulation. He became the master of a tomb of his own making. One day, a traveling merchant, a woman of wide, tranquil eyes and weathered hands, stopped by his store. She noticed Silas' posture, the hunched shoulders, the constant, nervous tapping of his foot, the way he clutched his ledgers as if they were a shield. She watched him pay for a cup of water, his face twisted in a silent grimace of suffering. The merchant smiled, not with pity, but with a strange, profound clarity. "Silas," she said, "you are guarding the water in the cup so fiercely that you have forgotten there is a river at your doorstep. You think if you release the water in your cup, you will die of thirst. But the river does not care for your cup. The river is the source. The cup is merely the vessel. If you pour it out, you make room for the fresh, cold mountain spring to enter." Silas looked at his hands, those trembling, gripping instruments of his own misery, and for the first time he saw the absurdity of his war. He had been so busy protecting his wealth that he had rendered it useless. He was a wealthy man who lived like a pauper, because his body had been trained to fear the very movement that defined his life. He was not a guardian of supply, he was the jailer of his own good. The transition from the keeper of the dried well to the master of the river begins with the most radical act one can undertake, the act of noticing. You are currently held in a spell, a rhythmic, unconscious pattern where your nervous system dictates your financial fate through the tension in your limbs. To embody this truth today, you must treat your next transaction as a sacred rite of observation. Do not attempt to fix it, to justify it, or to alter it immediately. Simply witness it. The next time you tap your card or press that confirm button, do not look away from the physical sensation. Feel the stomach knot. Observe the rise of the shoulders. Acknowledge the silent, screaming thought that says, "This is loss." Do not judge this reaction. Do not castigate yourself for being unspiritual or fearful. Just acknowledge it as a phantom, a relic of an old, exhausted instruction manual that no longer serves your path. By simply noticing, you are moving from a state of reaction, which is the hallmark of the victim, to a state of awareness, which is the foundation of the architect. You are inserting a wedge of consciousness into a process that has been running on autopilot for a lifetime. As you sit with this new awareness, consider that this is only the beginning of your liberation. The body is the first domino to fall. Once it learns that movement is not death, the mind will eventually follow, opening doors to possibilities that were previously obscured by the dust of your own bracing. You have learned that your body tells the truth about your internal state, but you have yet to learn how to dictate the response that follows that truth. The air around you is beginning to shift, for the patterns of the past are no longer the architects of your future. We have dismantled the first barricade. Now, we must turn our gaze to the very source of our supply and discover why we have been searching for it in the wrong direction. The bridge to our next realization is already forming. The scarcity you feel is not a fact of your finances, but a failure of your vision. Dare to keep your eyes open. The river is waiting. The scene opens in the quiet, sterile atmosphere of a study at midnight. A man, whom we shall call Elias, sits before a mahogany desk littered with the detritus of a life, measured in decimals. bank statements, utility bills, and a ledger that seems to grow thinner with every passing month. Outside, a thunderstorm rages, the rain lashing against the window pane with a relentless, rhythmic intensity. Elias stares at his digital banking portal, the glowing screen illuminating his face in a pale, ghostly hue. His balance is a figure that has reached a point of precarious stillness. To the outside world, this is simply a set of numbers. To Elias, it is a precipice. He feels the weight of the ending the phantom sensation that when this number hits zero, the world itself will cease its rotation. He looks at the screen and experiences the paradox of the modern void. He is surrounded by the infinite potential of a global economy, yet he feels entirely confined by the small, flickering digits before him. He watches the balance and imagines a drain, a vortex pulling his security into an abyss. He does not see a medium of exchange. He sees a disappearing act. He is mourning his money while it is still in his possession, grieving for the future he assumes is already lost. It is a portrait of the human condition trapped in the myth of the finite, where the belief in a shrinking pot creates a landscape of perpetual, haunting drought. To dismantle the myth of the finite, one must confront the profound error at the core of human financial perception, the belief that money is a static quantity. Why do we equate our life force with a finite ledger? Why does the subconscious cling so fiercely to the idea that there is a limited supply of good in the universe? The why is rooted in the ancestral legacy of survival. For millennia, humanity existed in environments where resources were indeed finite: a patch of soil, a hunted beast, a limited harvest. Our nervous systems were forged in the fires of scarcity. When we apply this primal logic to a modern, interconnected, digital economy, we suffer from a psychological mismatch. We are operating with a Pleistocene brain in an age of infinite circulation. The how of this misconception is even more insidious. We have come to view money as a liquid that, once poured from our cup, is forever removed from our sphere of influence. We view the transaction as a terminal event, a funeral, as it were, for our hard-earned labor. If we accept the premise that our money is a static resource that disappears upon use, then we must logically conclude that we are on a downward trajectory toward depletion. But consider the metaphysical truth. Money is not a thing, it is an energy. It is the physical manifestation of trust, service, and movement. If the source of all value is truly infinite, as the ancient sages and modern quantum theorists alike suggest, then the money in one's account is not the source. It is merely a local eddy in a vast, global river. When the eddy moves downstream, it does not evaporate, it simply travels, nourishing the landscape as it goes, eventually returning to the sea to be drawn up, condensed, and poured out again. The recursive trap is this: I believe the supply is limited, therefore I hoard. Because I hoard, I obstruct the flow. Because I obstruct the flow, I manifest the very lack I fear. We must realize that the fear of the empty account is not a reflection of reality, but a reflection of a rigid mind. The reality is that the river is always flowing, regardless of what is happening in one's personal vessel. By identifying money as a channel rather than a destination, we collapse the myth of the finite. We shift our consciousness from the dam builder who fears the water will run out to the river navigator who knows that the water is inexhaustible. In a parched province where the rains had failed for 2 consecutive seasons, there lived 2 farmers, Cale and Joran. Both men possessed a small bag of precious, high-quality seeds, the last of their harvest, meant for both sustenance and the future. Joran, fearing the encroaching emptiness of his pantry, decided that the only logical path was to ration his seeds. He consumed them sparingly, grinding them into a thin, bitter meal. He stared at his diminishing sack every day, his heart tightening with every grain he removed. He lived in a state of constant, gnawing anxiety, his body perpetually braced for the moment when the last seed would be gone. He treated his seeds as if they were his final, finite lifeblood. When the time for planting arrived, he looked at his near-empty sack and decided it was too risky to cast them into the dry, unyielding earth. He kept them safely locked away, certain that keeping them was the only way to ensure he did not starve. By the end of the season, Joran had no food, no harvest, and no future. The seeds he had saved had simply rotted in the dark, consumed by neglect. Kale, on the other hand, looked at his own sack and understood a different truth. He realized that the seed in his hand was not a meal, it was a promise. He recognized that to eat the seed was to accept a temporary relief that would result in a permanent end. Instead, Kale walked out into the dusty, cracked field and performed the act of faith. He cast his seeds into the earth. He let them leave his hand, not as a loss, but as an investment in the law of growth. He did not watch the sack. He watched the sky, and he watched the soil. He walked away from his wealth empty-handed, yet he was calm, for he had moved his supply into the cycle of life. When the rains finally returned, as they always do, for the cycle is never truly broken, Kale's field erupted in a lush, abundant harvest that dwarfed his initial investment. He had understood the nature of the source. Joran had worshipped the grain, while Kale had understood the harvest. The myth of the finite had destroyed Joran, while the trust in the infinite had liberated Kale. To move from the fear of the finite to the freedom of the infinite, you must begin to retrain your perception of every dollar that leaves your hand. Today, practice this shift. Whenever you engage in a transaction, no matter how small, consciously identify it as an act of circulation. When you pay your rent, do not visualize your account balance shrinking. Instead, visualize the money entering the vast, interconnected river. See it moving to the landlord, who then uses it to pay the maintenance crew, who then use it to feed their families, who then buy the clothes that you may one day purchase. See the money not as a fragment of your net worth that is vanishing, but as a seed that you are casting into the soil of the economy. There is no loss in a circular system, only the transformation of value. When you pay for your groceries, you are not losing money, you are exchanging currency for the nourishment that sustains your physical existence. You are literally turning coin into life. That is an act of alchemy, not an act of depletion. As you walk through your day, ask yourself, am I hoarding the seed or am I planting it? By consciously directing your intent, you are no longer a victim of the myth of the finite. You are becoming a conscious steward of the circulation. But be warned, the mind will fight you. It will demand to see the security of the pile. It will whisper that this is naive. Yet, you have already seen the result of the logical path, the anxiety, the contraction, the stagnation. You are choosing a different way. You are learning to walk with the rhythm of the river, rather than fighting the current. You have begun to see that your supply is not the number on the screen. Your supply is the infinite capacity of the universe to flow through you. Now that we have dismantled the myth of the finite, we must address the architect of your reality, the words you speak, and the mold you cast into the world. You are currently crafting a masterpiece or a prison, one sentence at a time. The next chapter will reveal how to seize the chisel and change the shape of your world forever. The patterns are shifting. Are you ready to define what comes next? Imagine a vast, dimly lit workshop that exists behind the veil of your own skull. It is a place of perpetual industry, silent and rhythmic, where the air is thick with the scent of ozone and cooling clay. In this workshop, there are no holidays, no moments of true stillness. There is only the ceaseless turning of a potter's wheel, a figure. Faceless and tireless, the architect of your subconscious is at this wheel, working with the fluid clay of your internal monologue. Every word you speak, in the quiet of your own mind, every casual grievance muttered under your breath at the supermarket checkout, and every silent affirmation of lack is a handprint pressed into the damp earth of a mold. You are standing in the gallery of your own life, surrounded by thousands of these vessels. Some are jagged, heavy, and cold, crafted from the clay of fear and the killing fire of anxiety. Others are smooth, translucent, and glowing, formed from the clay of gratitude and the light of trust. The paradox is that you often stand before a vessel of your own making, filled with bitterness or constraint, and you lament its shape. You cry out to the heavens, asking why your life feels cramped, why the flow of abundance is blocked, and why the vessels you receive are always empty. You forget that you are the artisan. You forget that the mold was cast not in some distant future or by some cruel fate, but in the mundane, flickering moments of yesterday, the tap of the card, the sigh of resignation as the utility bill arrived, the habitual phrase, "I can't afford that." You are the creator of your own cage, and you are currently holding the wet clay in your hands, preparing to shape the next hour of your existence. To understand the power of the word, we must step into the realm of metaphysical architecture. The core principle that the spoken word creates a mold is not a poetic metaphor, it is the fundamental law of human manifestation. But why, one might ask, does this law hold such sway over our physical reality? The why lies in the interaction between consciousness and the physical plane. Words are not merely sounds or symbols, they are the vibration of intent. In a universe governed by resonant frequencies, the word acts as a sonic template. When you speak, you are issuing an instruction to the latent energy of the world to reorganize itself around the shape of your utterance. If the instruction is lack, the energy coalesces into a structure of resistance. If the instruction is abundance, the energy flows into a channel of expansion. The how of this process is what we call the recursive solidification of belief. The mind creates a thought. The word reinforces the thought. The act, the transaction, seals the thought into a mold. Once the mold is cast, the subconscious accepts it as the law of your life. It then works tirelessly to replicate that mold in every subsequent experience. Why do so many struggle to change their reality? It is because they attempt to change the content of the vessel without changing the mold. They pray for wealth, while their daily language remains anchored in the vocabulary of poverty. This is the recursive trap. I speak of scarcity, therefore my subconscious designs a life of scarcity. Because my life is scarce, I continue to speak of it. Because I continue to speak, the mold hardens. To break this cycle, one must recognize that the mold is not created only during formal prayer or structured affirmations. It is cast in the trenches of the ordinary. Every time you declare, "I am struggling," you are literally calling for the universe to build a structure that confirms that struggle. The subconscious does not distinguish between a casual complaint and a decree. It simply accepts the command. To change the building, you must change the blueprint, and you must do it in the only place where creation is possible, the present, fleeting moment of your next expression. In the city of Greystone, there lived a master sculptor named Valerius. Valerius was renowned for his ability to craft basins that could hold water for years without losing a single drop. It was said that Valerius worked with a strange, mystical discipline. Before he began to carve, he would sit in silence, speaking a single word over the block of stone. One day, a wealthy merchant came to him, pleading for a basin to catch the waters of his growing trade. The merchant was a man of restless energy, constantly complaining about the market, the taxes, and the impending fear of competitors. As Valerius began to work, the merchant stood over him, pouring out a steady stream of worry. "The markets are shifting," the merchant groaned. "I fear there will be nothing left by winter. Everything I touch seems to dwindle." Valerius did not look up. He continued to carve. But the merchant noticed that as he spoke his fears, the stone beneath Valerius's chisel began to crack. a fissure appeared, deep and irreparable. Valerius stopped, set down his hammer, and looked at the merchant with eyes as steady as stone. "You are not asking me for a basin," Valerius said. "You are asking me to carve your fear into the rock. Every word you speak becomes a line in the stone, and because your words are jagged, the vessel cannot hold water." The merchant was stunned. He realized that the fissures in his own life were not due to bad luck, but to the constant, vibrating instruction of his own mouth. He had been casting his own misfortune into the mold of his future. He stayed with Valerius for a month, not to buy a basin, but to learn the discipline of silence and the power of the intentional word. He learned that to build a vessel that could hold the abundance of the sea, he had to speak as if the sea were already filling it. When he finally returned to his trade, he did not speak of lack. He spoke of the current, of the flow, of the grace that sustained him. And for the first time in his life, the water remained in the basin. The transition from a life of random, unconscious casting to a life of deliberate creation begins with a simple, yet terrifying responsibility. You must become the guardian of your own mouth. For the remainder of this day, initiate the Watchman Protocol. Every time you find yourself about to utter a word of limitation, even if it seems like a humorous exaggeration or a minor complaint, you must pause. Recognize the hand of the architect reaching for the clay. Ask yourself, is this the shape I want my life to take? If you find yourself saying, "I can't afford that," replace it immediately with a declaration of your choosing, such as, "I am currently directing my resources toward higher priorities," or, "I am opening the way for more to arrive." This is not a game of semantics. It is a game of mastery. You are rewriting the genetic code of your daily existence. You will find that the moment you stop casting the mold of fear, you feel a strange, initial emptiness, a vacuum. Do not be afraid. That vacuum is the space where the new reality is waiting to be born. You have begun to understand that the mold is cast in the mundane. But what happens when the mold is already cast? What happens when you are already living in the shadow of a vessel you didn't mean to create? We have learned that words are the blueprints, but we have yet to master the alchemy of the pause. The secret mechanism that allows you to shatter the old mold and reclaim your authority over the workshop. The air in the workshop is shifting. The next chapter will lead you into the heart of the sacred pause, where you will learn to step outside the flow of time to reclaim your creative power. The blueprints are being redrawn. Are you prepared to speak a new world into existence? The world operates on the tyranny of the immediate. Consider the checkout aisle of a grand emporium, where the fluorescent lights hum with a sterile, white frequency. A man stands before the terminal, his hand hovering over the payment sensor. To an observer, this is a pedestrian moment of commerce. But to the man, it is a precipice. The screen glows, demanding confirmation. He is caught in a temporal eddy, the space between the impulse to pay and the execution of the transaction. In this flicker of a second, the universe holds its breath. This is the sacred pause. Most individuals race through this moment, propelled by an invisible, frantic momentum that forces their fingers to strike the glass before their souls have caught up to their bodies. It is a paradox of human agency. We possess the power of free will, yet we surrender it to the automatic rhythm of the machine. The man's pulse is rapid, his internal monologue a chaotic scramble of, "Will this drain me?" or, "Can I really afford the cost?" The air around him seems to warp as his nervous system prepares to brace for a perceived loss. He is not living in the present. He is living in a frantic, projected future. Then, a sudden, inexplicable stillness descends. He stops. The world of the emporium continues its frantic pace, but inside him, time has dilated. He stands in the threshold, the silence widening like a pool of ink, granting him the one thing he has been denied all day, the space to choose. The sacred pause is not merely a cessation of movement, It is the fundamental site of human sovereignty. To understand its importance, we must apply recursive logic to the nature of the decision. Why is the pause the only place where free will resides? The why is found in the mechanics of the nervous system. Our reactions are governed by the limbic brain, the ancient, reactive, and often paranoid guardian of our survival. When faced with an expenditure, the limbic brain fires a command: contract. This is an automated, programmed, and unconscious reaction. If one acts immediately, one is merely a biological puppet of the past. The pause, however, allows the prefrontal cortex, the center of higher reasoning and spiritual alignment, to come online. Without the pause, there is no choice, only reflex. How does the pause alter the fabric of one's financial reality? By interrupting the reflex, we insert a wedge into the causal chain of the universe. Consider the recursive loop of the reactive mind. Fear triggers the impulse. The impulse triggers the action. The action reinforces the fear. This cycle is the prison of the unawakened. The sacred pause breaks this loop. It creates a vacuum. Into that vacuum, one can introduce a new variable: intention. Why do we struggle to initiate this pause? Because the ego thrives on momentum. It fears the silence, for in the silence, it loses its power to dictate the narrative of survival. The ego demands speed because speed is the mask of necessity. When we slow down, we realize that the emergency was a fabrication. How, then, do we sustain this? We must see the pause not as a delay, but as a deliberate act of mastery. We are reclaiming the throne of our consciousness from the automatic machines of our survival instincts. In the silence of the pause, the individual is no longer a victim of the transaction. They are the sovereign of it. The pause is the moment where the soul asserts its dominance over the purse. In the high-altitude kingdom of Iridia, the people were obsessed with the instant result. They believed that any delay in action was a sign of weakness. Their lives were a blur of motion, and as a result, their bridges, the literal connections between their mountain peaks, were flimsy and prone to collapse, for they were built in the panicked hurry of their own anxiety. There lived an old artisan named Kalin, the only bridge builder in the kingdom, who refused to work with the fevered pace of his countrymen. When the king commissioned a bridge across the great chasm, the citizens scoffed at Kalin's methodology. He would stand at the edge of the chasm for hours, sometimes days, doing nothing but watching the wind and listening to the rock. He did not measure, he did not hammer, he simply breathed. "He is wasting our time," the people whispered. "He does not know the value of the coin." But Kalin was engaged in the sacred pause. He was waiting for the moment when the chasm would reveal the path of least resistance. He was waiting for the rhythm of the mountain to align with the intent of his work. When he finally struck the first stone, the sound was not one of frantic labor, but of absolute, resonant authority. The bridge he built was not merely wood and iron. It was a physical manifestation of perfect, stillness-born alignment. When the great storm came, a gale that leveled every other bridge in Iridia, Kalin's bridge stood immovable, for it had been anchored in the silence of the pause. The people realized then that the haste of their actions had only ensured the frailty of their outcomes. Kalin had not worked faster. He had worked deeper. By choosing to pause, he had accessed a power that the frantic could never comprehend. The power to pause is the power to reset the reality you are currently building. It is the most sophisticated tool in your arsenal. To embody this truth, you must implement the threshold ritual. For the next 24 hours, treat every interaction with money, no matter how insignificant, as a formal threshold. Before you reach for your card, before you open your banking application, before you hand a single note to a cashier, you must stop. Place your feet firmly on the ground. Take one deep, deliberate breath, not a shallow, nervous gasp, but a full expansion of the diaphragm. Feel the air moving into the empty spaces of your lungs. This is your anchor. In that single, crystalline moment of stillness. You are no longer a person reacting to a bill. You are an architect standing before a blank page. Ask yourself silently, who am I choosing to be in this transaction? Are you the person of lack or the person of circulation? Your answer is not found in your bank balance. It is found in the calm of your next exhale. You have now begun to dismantle the frantic pace that has kept you in the grip of the myth of the finite. You have learned that the pause is the gateway to your authority, but having gained the authority to stand still, you must now learn what to do when you decide to act. Words have been the blueprints, and the pause has been the silence from which they are birthed, but now we must confront the alchemy of the reversal. You have been speaking into the air, casting molds of scarcity. Now, we shall look at how to take the very words you once used to condemn yourself and flip them into a key that unlocks the door to your expansion. The air is cooling, and the workshop is prepared. You have mastered the silence. Are you prepared to master the sound? The bridge to the next level of your consciousness is built. Shall we cross it? The scene is set in the quiet, dim recesses of an office at dusk. Julian, a man whose life has been meticulously categorized by the ledgers of profit and loss, sits before his glowing screen. A digital invoice stares back at him, a sum that, in his old narrative, represented a loss. Outside, the city is a blurred tapestry of lights, indifferent to the friction occurring within the small room. Julian's hand trembles as he prepares to click submit payment. In his mind, he is not paying for a service. He is performing a bloodletting. The air in the room feels thick, heavy with the phantom weight of survival, the ancient, primal dread that the bank account, once diminished, will never again find its fullness. He pauses, as if struck by a sudden realization. He looks at his reflection in the dark glass of the monitor. He sees a man who has spent decades acting as if he were a victim of his own resources, a man who has held his money so tightly that he has stifled its utility. The paradox is biting. The more he gripped the coin, the more he felt himself fading. He reaches for the keyboard, but he does not strike the key in fear. He breathes. He feels the tension in his shoulders, the armor of the insecure, and he deliberately, almost painfully, releases it. He is about to engage in a ritual of reversal, a defiance of the gravity of his own past. He prepares to speak a new law into the digital ether, a sentence that sounds like a whisper of rebellion against the logic of scarcity. To master the alchemy of reversal, one must comprehend the mechanism by which the mind anchors itself in the negative. Why do we possess a natural inclination to label the departure of money as loss rather than exchange? The why is rooted in the ego's obsession with permanence. The ego is a solidified construct that fears change because change represents the dissolution of the self. Money, as a fluid medium, is the antithesis of the ego's desire for static safety. When we see money leave, the ego interprets this as a threat to its borders. It screams loss because it identifies the money as part of its own skin. How then does the reversal work? The alchemy occurs when we strip away the ego's emotional overlay and replace it with the objective truth of circulation. We must ask, what is the fundamental nature of a transaction? It is a movement of energy. By applying the reversal, we are not merely performing a mental trick. We are changing the neurological and metaphysical pathway of the experience. The recursive nature of this shift is profound. I change my language, therefore I change my physiology. Because my physiology is calm, I perceive the transaction as a blessing. Because I perceive it as a blessing, I attract more opportunities for circulation. It is a cycle of liberation. Most people fail to execute this because they want to feel the truth of the reversal before they speak it. This is a misunderstanding of the law. One must speak the truth into the void, creating the reality through the utterance. When you say, this money moves in divine circulation, you are not describing what is happening. You are authoring what is happening. You are telling the universe, this is the nature of my reality, a river that flows, nourishes, and returns. The resistance you feel during the reversal is simply the friction of the old mold breaking. It is the sound of your own liberation. In the ancient trading port of Ethelgard, there lived a merchant named Hesperus who was famed for his inexplicable prosperity. While other merchants groaned when the tax collectors came, or when they paid their suppliers, Hesperus walked through his days with an air of profound, unshakable calm. A young apprentice, curious to learn the secret of the old man's wealth, followed him one day to the marketplace. He watched as Hesperus paid a massive sum for a shipment of exotic silks. The apprentice expected to see the usual wincing, the frantic checking of ledgers, the bitter murmurs of, "There goes my profit." Instead, he watched Hesperus pause. The old man took the coin, held it for a heartbeat, and whispered something to the supplier, his face radiant with a quiet, genuine gratitude. That evening, the apprentice confronted him. "Master, you paid more than anyone else today, yet you seemed as joyous as if you had received a gift. How do you not feel the loss?" Hesperus gestured to the harbor, where the tide was rushing out toward the horizon. "Do you see the tide, my son? When the water pulls back from the shore, does the sea weep for its loss? Does the ocean fear it is running dry? No. It knows that this movement is the very thing that brings the fish, the ships, and the renewal of the coast. I treat my wealth like the tide. When I pay, I am sending the water out to sea. I do not see the coin leaving. I see the promise of the return. I bless the silks I receive, and I bless the hands that take my gold. By the time the tide returns, it brings with it more than it took, because I have aligned myself with the flow of the world, not the fear of the drain." Hesperus smiled. "To reverse the fear, you must bless the movement. You do not lose money, you release it into the service of your own future. The alchemy of reversal is your primary tool for reclaiming your authority. To embody this, you must adopt the blessing of the outflow. Starting now, every time you send money, whether through a digital transfer, a physical payment, or even the automatic renewal of a subscription, you are to commit to the following sequence. First, pause. Second, feel the physical sensation of the loss response, and consciously soften your muscles. Third, speak the new law. You may whisper it, or say it in the silence of your mind. This money moves in divine circulation. It blesses where it goes, and it returns to me multiplied under grace. Do not treat this as a mere mantra. Treat it as a command to your own subconscious. You are telling your nervous system that the money is not vanishing into a black hole. It is going on an errand for you. It is going out to serve, to nourish, and to build the infrastructure of your life, and it is ordained to return with interest. Subscribe to this journey if you are ready to witness the power of your own words in the theater of your finances. You have begun to see that your words are the steering mechanism for your economic life. You have stopped being a victim of your own reactions. But having learned to direct the flow of your money, you must now address the second, perhaps more challenging half of the equation, the receiving. Many can give, but few know how to truly receive, without the poison of guilt or the frantic impulse to immediately undo the gift. In the next chapter, we shall explore the art of divine receiving, and why your ability to accept is the true test of your alignment with the infinite. The river is flowing out. How will you prepare the shore for its return? The bridge is solid. The journey continues. The setting is an opulent ballroom. Though it is not wealth that characterizes the scene, it is the posture of those who inhabit it. A man stands near the center of the hall, holding a crystal glass of light. A benefactor approaches, offering him a golden key, a token of opportunity, a symbol of recognition for his life's work. Yet, as the key is extended, the man's body performs a subtle, tragic choreography of denial. His shoulders hunch inward. His gaze drops to the floor. His hand hovers, not to accept, but to ward off. He is physically blocking the gift. He apologizes for his presence, he minimizes his contribution, and he hastens to offer a service in return, desperate to balance the books so that he may no longer feel the debt of the gesture. It is a profound paradox. He has spent his entire life praying for this specific door to be opened, yet now that the hand is extended, he is busy slamming the door shut. This is the closed fist syndrome, the pervasive, silent illness of the soul that refuses to accept the very abundance it craves. In this moment, the ballroom feels small, stifling. The air vibrates with the tension of his unworthiness. He is the guardian of his own poverty, standing in the middle of a feast, starving because he cannot bring himself to sit at the table. He views the act of receiving not as a grace, but as a transaction that leaves him diminished, indebted, or somehow exposed. The gift hangs in the air, suspended between two hands, waiting for a permission that may never come. To master the art of divine receiving, one must interrogate the deepest, most calcified layers of the human ego. Why does the human heart, which beats for growth, recoil from the fulfillment of its own desires? The why is found in the psychological construct of the equilibrium of worth. We have been trained in a culture of transactional morality. Nothing is free. All things must be earned. To receive is to be in debt. This belief system creates an internal glass ceiling. If our self-worth is tethered to the belief that we are only okay when we are useful or when we are struggling to pay our way, then receiving without struggle feels like a violation of the natural order. It triggers a profound cognitive dissonance. The how of this blockage is a recursive nightmare. I believe I am unworthy of ease, therefore I reject the gift. Because I reject the gift, I remain in a state of struggle. Because I remain in struggle, I confirm my belief that I am unworthy of ease. This is the cycle of the small self. To receive is to acknowledge that the source of your supply is not your own frantic, grinding labor, but the infinite, grace-filled movement of the universe. This is terrifying to the ego, which insists that it is the sole author of its success. Receiving requires a surrender of control. To accept a gift, a blessing, or an opportunity without immediately reaching for the but or the IOU is to admit that you are part of a larger, benevolent architecture. It is an act of spiritual vulnerability. The question is not whether you are allowed to receive. The question is whether you are willing to let the channel remain clear. If you cannot receive, you cannot be a part of the circulation. You become a terminal point, a dam, and eventually a stagnant pond. You must realize that the gift you refuse is not just a loss to you. It is a disruption of the flow of good in the entire system. When you receive with grace, you honor the giver, you honor yourself, and you honor the source of the gift itself. In a land plagued by a decade of dust, there lived a humble gardener named Alara. Her garden was her life, a small patch of green in an otherwise desolate world. Alara worked from dawn until dusk, hauling buckets of water from a distant, muddy well. Her hands were calloused, her back was bent, and her skin was etched with the lines of relentless, unrewarding toil. She took pride in her suffering, for she believed that only by the sweat of her own brow could she sustain her garden. One season, the clouds gathered with a ferocity never seen before. A gentle, cooling, and abundant rain began to fall. Not the mud-slicked runoff of the wells, but pure, sky-born nectar. The villagers opened their cisterns, tilted their faces to the heavens, and danced in the downpour, but not Alara. Alara grabbed heavy sheets of canvas and rushed to cover her garden. She scrambled about, frantic and angry, blocking the rain, protecting her plants from the free water. She believed that if she did not haul the water herself, she would lose her status as the master of her domain. She feared that if she accepted the rain, she would be indebted to the sky, and she did not know how to repay the clouds. She worked until she collapsed, her canvas torn, her garden soaked by the very rain she had fought to repel. As she lay on the moist, fragrant earth, she felt the life returning to her withered plants, a vitality her well water could never provide. The rain had done in minutes what her years of toil had failed to achieve. She looked at her empty buckets and realized the depth of her error. She had been protecting her poverty because she had equated her worth with her struggle. She had refused the gift of the universe because she did not know how to be anything other than a laborer. In that moment of surrender, Alara learned that receiving is not an act of weakness. It is an act of recognizing that the gardener and the garden are both nourished by a force far greater than their own hands. The art of divine receiving is the final, necessary piece of your financial and spiritual liberation. To embody this truth, you must implement the graceful acceptance protocol. Today, when someone offers you a gift, be it a compliment, a payment, a favor, or even a small, unexpected opportunity, do not deflect, do not minimize, do not immediately offer a trade. Simply pause. Take a full, deep breath. Look the person in the eye, or if it is a situation, look at the opportunity itself and say, silently or aloud, I receive this with gratitude. This is proof that supply is moving in my life, and I am open to more. Feel the resistance in your body, that tight, protective urge to decline or explain, and breathe through it. Let yourself feel the weight of the gift. Do not rush to fill the silence with an excuse. Let the gift sit in your hands. You are training your nervous system to tolerate the presence of good without needing to earn it. You have mastered the pause, the word, the reversal, and the art of receiving. You are no longer the same person who began this journey in the grip of the contracted breath. But there is a final, vital shift required. Having learned to move through the world with this new consciousness, you must now learn how to anchor your physical self in this state. It is not enough to think and speak. You must embody the knowing. You must learn to stand in the world as a person who knows their source is infinite. The stage is set for the final integration of your mind, body, and spirit. The next chapter will reveal how to align your physical posture with your new reality, effectively silencing the final echoes of the old, fearful self. The foundation is laid. The temple is ready. Are you prepared to inhabit it? The scene opens in the silent, golden-hued solitude of a morning meditation space. A man named Silas, a veteran of the financial wars, a man who has spent years perfecting his affirmations, sits with his eyes closed, reciting the laws of abundance. His words are perfect, his tone is calm, and his intent is pure. Yet, observe his body. His jaw is a hinge of iron. His shoulders are pulled tight toward his ears, creating a cage of tension that defies the peace he speaks of. His hands are curled into fists, white-knuckled, as if he is physically holding on to a ghost. There is a dissonance here that is as loud as a thunderclap in a cathedral. The mind speaks of ever-increasing streams and divine supply, but the body is screaming, danger. Brace for impact. It is the great paradox of the spiritual student. They have learned to command the tongue, but they remain slaves to the nervous system. The body, that ancient, reptilian architect of survival, does not recognize the logic of the intellect. It knows only the chemical memory of the struggle. As Silas breathes, his body remains a fortress, locked against the very flow he claims to invite. He is a person walking through a garden of roses while wearing armor made of rusted, jagged steel. He has not yet realized that faith is not a state of mind, it is a posture of the marrow. To achieve true prosperity, one must resolve the split between the spirit's declaration and the body's contraction. Why is it that the most elegant affirmations fail to materialize in the physical world? The why lies in the somatic feedback loop. The subconscious mind does not listen to your words. It listens to the signal your body sends to the universe. If your words say, I am abundant, while your biology signals I am hunted, the universe responds to the stronger signal. the physical. The body is the broadcast antenna of your soul. If the antenna is bent, twisted by years of bracing for loss, the signal of abundance is distorted into a garbled, weak static. The how of this integration involves a recursive, somatic rewiring. I feel safe, therefore I relax. Because I relax, my nervous system stops signaling danger. Because the danger signal stops, I recognize the opportunities that were always present. Most people skip the body entirely, attempting to think their way into a new reality. But the body is the master of the subconscious. To bridge this, we must recognize that the body is not just a vessel for the mind. It is the storehouse of every financial trauma, every lack memory, and every moment of panic you have ever experienced. When you spend money, your body recalls the fear of your parents, the stress of your youth, and the anxiety of past failures. It is a biological haunting. To transcend this, one must move beyond positive thinking into somatic knowing. Embodied faith is the practice of consciously overriding the fight-or-flight response during the moment of exchange. It is the art of teaching your cells that the river does not threaten the shore. You are not trying to manipulate your biology. You are inviting it to grow into the truth you have already spoken. You are essentially taking your body by the hand and walking it through the gate, proving to it, step by step, that the danger it remembers is no longer present. In the mountain kingdoms of the East, there lived a legendary archer named Kale. It was said that Kale never missed a target, even in the gale force winds of the high peaks. His secret, however, was not in his eyes or his aim. It was in his grip. In the beginning, Kale was a man of intense, trembling effort. He would grip the bow so tightly his knuckles turned white, his breath caught in his throat, and his shoulders bunched up as if to fight the bowstring. He hit the target, but he was always exhausted, his body a map of knots and pain. One day, his master, a woman of 80 years, who could shoot a needle through a leaf at 100 paces, walked up to him and struck his wrist with a wooden staff. "You fight the wind," she said. "You treat the bow as an enemy, and therefore your body treats the arrow as a risk. To hit the target, you must be the target." She taught him the open palm. He had to learn to hold the bow with such gentleness that a bird could rest on his hand without fear. He had to breathe into his stomach, not his chest. He had to soften his jaw, even as he drew the string to his ear. When Kale finally mastered this, when he could draw the bow with his heart open and his body entirely at ease, he did not just hit the target, he transcended the need to aim. He became one with the arrow. He realized that the tension he had been carrying, the bracing, was not an aid to his success. It was the very thing that made his success feel like a burden. Once he embodied the ease of the shot, his life followed suit. His wealth, his influence, and his peace of mind expanded, because he was no longer an archer fighting his bow. He was a master living in his own skin. Embodied faith is the final step in your transformation. It is the bridge between the theoretical understanding of abundance and the lived experience of it. For the remainder of this day, initiate the somatic reset whenever you feel the urge to check your accounts, or when you are in the midst of a transaction, perform a rapid, 3-step physical audit. First, drop the shoulders. Let them fall away from your ears until they reach their natural, neutral position. Second, unclench the jaw. Let your tongue drop from the roof of your mouth. Third, soften the hands. Whether you are holding a card, a phone, or cash, ensure your grip is loose. This is not a suggestion. It is a command to your nervous system. By forcing the body into a state of relaxation, you are cutting the link between the transaction and the panic response. You are telling your cells, "We are safe here, we are in the flow." You have learned to pause, to speak, to reverse, to receive, and now to embody. You have built a fortress of consciousness that is both unshakable and perfectly open. But there is one final, silent gate to pass through. the transition between the sleeping and the waking worlds. Many people undo all their progress in the twilight hours, filling their minds with the debris of the day before they rest. The next chapter will reveal how to protect your inner world at the dawn and the dusk, ensuring that your subconscious remains a garden, not a graveyard of worries. You have become a master of the day. Now, learn to govern the night. The stars are aligning. The rest is beginning. Are you ready to drift into the truth? The world is yet untethered. It is that fragile, blue-gray hour before the sun breaks the horizon, the threshold of the morning. A woman lies in the stillness of her bedroom, the shadows of the night still clinging to the corners of the room. She is hovering in the twilight state, the theta wave lullaby where the mind is soft, impressionable, and utterly unguarded. In this delicate pocket of existence, she reaches out not for her breath, not for the quiet intention of her soul, but for the flickering, jagged light of a smartphone screen. As the glow hits her eyes, the transformation is instantaneous. The soft, infinite expanse of her dreaming mind is shattered. Instantly, the demands of the world rush in. The unpaid invoice, the urgent email, the news of distant conflicts, the crushing weight of a society obsessed with scarcity. Her breath, which was deep and rhythmic seconds ago, hitches. Her stomach tightens as the adrenaline of the to-do list floods her bloodstream. She has abandoned the gate. By checking the world before she checks in with herself, she has surrendered the architecture of her day to the chaos of the masses. It is a daily tragedy of immense proportions. We open the doors of our sanctuary to the wolves before we have even kindled our own fire. We are building our life on a foundation of sand, shifting and restless, because we gave the first and last moments of our consciousness to the machine. To master the morning and evening gates is to understand that consciousness is not a constant. It is a rhythmic cycle of expansion and contraction. Why do the first and last thoughts of the day hold such disproportionate power over the landscape of our lives? The why is found in the plasticity of the subconscious mind during the transition states of sleep. As you drift into the abyss of the night, and as you emerge from it at dawn, your brain bypasses the critical, analytical filter of the waking ego. You are, in essence, broadcasting into the foundational soil of your reality. Whatever you plant in these moments, fear, worry, the scarcity of the world, will germinate and take root as the dominant law of your following day. The how of this process is a recursive loop of self-fulfilling prophecy. I wake up to stress, therefore my day is colored by anxiety. Because my day is anxious, I go to sleep ruminating on the failures of the day. Because I ruminate, I wake up to more stress. We are trapping ourselves in a recursive prison of our own design. By allowing the noise of the external world to dictate the morning, we are essentially handing the keys to our castle to a stranger. To govern the gates, one must treat these moments as sacred. The morning is the instruction. The evening is the release. Why do we struggle to do this? Because the ego loves the addiction of the problem. It feels safer to worry, for worry gives the illusion of control. But the truth is that the subconscious does not know the difference between a real event and an imagined one. If you go to sleep rehearsing the shortage of money, you are training your subconscious to manufacture that shortage in your physical reality. To flip this, you must understand that the gate is not a lock, it is a filter. By controlling what enters and exits the gate, you determine the vibration of your entire existence. You are not just going to sleep. You are returning the data of your day to the infinite, and you are not just waking up. You are setting the tempo for the symphony of your life. On the edge of a great turbulent sea stood a lighthouse known as the Beacon of Equilibrium. The keeper, an ancient man named Thalasus, was responsible for ensuring the light never failed, for the waters were treacherous and filled with jagged reefs. But the reefs were not the only danger. The fog of the region was a living thing, a thick, swirling vapor that could disorient even the most seasoned sailors. Thalasus understood that the fog could not be fought with the light alone. It had to be governed at the source. Every morning, before the sun touched the waves, the lassus would climb to the top of the tower and perform the rite of clarity. He would speak into the silence, defining the horizon, mapping the path of the coming day, and anchoring his own spirit in the absolute certainty of the light. He would not look at the storm-tossed logs of the previous night until his own flame was steady. Every evening, as the stars began to pin themselves to the velvet sky, he would perform the rite of release. He would stand at the base of the tower, taking the debris of the day, the broken ropes, the salt-crusted memories, the anxieties of the ships that had struggled against the current, and he would cast them into the sea, letting the tide take them to the depths where they could no longer harm anyone. Because Thalassus governed his gates, the beacon of equilibrium remained unshakable. The sailors who relied on his light often remarked that when they were in his presence, their own fears seemed to dissolve. They did not know that his strength was not a gift of fate. It was a disciplined geometry of the soul. He refused to let the fog of the world enter his tower, and he refused to let the weight of the past follow him into the night. By tending to the beginning and the end, he mastered the middle. The mastery of your life is determined by the mastery of your transitions. To embody this, you must adopt the gatekeeper protocol. For the morning, before you touch your phone, before you check your emails, before you engage with the demands of anyone else, even your family, or the news of the day, you must claim the first 10 minutes. Sit in the quiet. Say, today, I move through a world of divine supply. Money comes, money goes, and money returns blessed and multiplied. I am guided, supported, and provided for in perfect ways. Let this be the fundamental frequency of your day. It is not a request, it is a decree. For the evening, before you close your eyes, do not take the unfinished business of your day to bed with you. Say, I release this day in peace. Every seed I have planted is working under grace. While I rest, divine intelligence opens the way for my good. Then, truly release it. Imagine your worries as dry leaves being swept out of your mind and into the infinite darkness, where they can no longer reach you. You have mastered the architecture of your subconscious. You have reclaimed your body, your words, and the very thresholds of your waking life. But all of this serves one ultimate purpose: to dissolve the illusion of your money versus the world's supply. We have been preparing to dismantle the final barrier, the belief that prosperity is for the few or the lucky. In the next chapter, we will explore why your lack is not a virtue and how to view your wealth as a service to the entire world. The threshold is crossed. The night is quiet. Tomorrow, the world will see a person who is no longer running in the fog, but walking in the light. Are you ready to see what remains when the illusion of I is replaced by the reality of flow? The sun hangs low over a bustling marketplace, casting long, gilded shadows that stretch across the cobblestones. A woman, Clara, walks through the crowd. She is a person of significant means, yet she carries herself with a strange, lingering hesitancy, a phantom tension in her posture, a shadow of the guilt she has carried since her youth. She looks at her reflection in the glass of a storefront, seeing not the beauty of her life, but the excess of it. To her, every luxury is a tally mark against her moral character. Every comfort is a whispered accusation that she has taken too much while others have too little. She encounters a beggar at the gate, and her hand moves instinctively toward her purse. But it is not a gesture of connection. It is a frantic attempt at penance. She drops a coin not to bless, but to apologize for her own success. The paradox is haunting. She is a channel of immense resource, yet she treats her wealth as a stain. She believes that to be spiritual, she must be small, hidden, and slightly deprived. She lives in the shadow of the ancient, poisonous myth that prosperity is a zero-sum game, where one's comfort is the direct product of another's misery. She walks with a heavy head, unaware that her guilt is not a service to the world, but an obstruction, a dam that prevents the river of grace from flowing through her into the thirsty soil of the marketplace. She is holding her own power hostage, believing she is doing a noble deed by burying her talent in the sand. To transform our relationship with wealth, we must confront the most resilient of all psychological barriers, the morality of scarcity. Why have we been conditioned to believe that lack is a state of holiness? The why is rooted in the misinterpretation of sacrifice. For centuries, spiritual traditions have mistakenly equated the renunciation of material goods with the purification of the soul. We have taken the metaphor of letting go and turned it into the dogma of staying empty. We believe that to be pure is to be needy, and to be abundant is to be corrupt. The how of this cognitive trap is a recursive loop of self-sabotage. I believe my wealth is stolen from others, therefore I feel guilty. Because I feel guilty, I subconsciously sabotage my own flow of income to remain pure. Because I am now impoverished, I can no longer offer genuine service or support. Because I cannot offer support, I confirm my belief that my lack is the right state of being. This is the death of potential. We must ask, does the sun feel guilty for its brilliance? Does the ocean feel ashamed of its depth? Prosperity is not a scorecard of self-worth. It is a function of service. Money is merely energy, the physical currency of human contribution. If you possess a high volume of it, it means you have contributed a high volume of value to the collective. When you hold it with fear, you are essentially burying the potential for further value. True prosperity is not vanity. It is the wisdom to circulate resources in ways that nourish, sustain, and expand the lives of others. Your lack does not heal the world. Your anxiety does not feed the hungry. Your refusal to succeed does not make you holy. It only removes one more person from the list of those who could be making a difference. The moral imperative is not to be poor. It is to be a clear, unclogged channel. You are not the owner of your wealth, you are its steward. To hoard is a crime, but to hide your light is a failure of purpose. In the city of Oakhaven, the people believed that the great river was a finite pool, and that anyone who diverted its water to their own fields was robbing their neighbor. One man, Julian, grew wealthy by building a series of ingenious mills along the river, using the water to grind grain for the entire province. His mills were efficient, his prices were fair, and the village flourished. Yet, Julian was tortured by the town elders, who constantly whispered that he was taking too much. He began to dismantle his mills, piece by piece, out of a hollow sense of guilt. As the mills ceased to turn, the village fell into hunger. The fields dried up. The grain rotted. The elders, who had once claimed they wanted equality, now stood in line for bread that was no longer being ground. Julian's mentor, an ancient woman of the hills, came to him as he sat by the silent, stagnant water. "You think you have served the village by stopping your flow," she said. "But look at what your guilt has created. The river still flows, but it does no work. It provides no bread. You have not made the village more equal, you have made it more desperate. Your wealth was never yours to possess, it was yours to direct. When you stop the mill, you stop the blessing. The water does not care who owns the wheel, it only knows that it must move to nourish the land." Julian looked at the silent, dark water and saw the truth. His guilt had been a form of supreme selfishness. He was more concerned with his own moral comfort than with the survival of his people. He began to rebuild his mills, not for his own gain, but for the sake of the harvest. He became a force of nature, a steward of the current, and as he turned the wheel, he saw that the more he produced, the more the entire village thrived. The river was not finite, it was an invitation. To move from the prison of guilt to the freedom of stewardship, you must redefine your relationship with every dollar you hold. Today, practice the service audit. Whenever you spend money, or whenever you receive it, ask yourself, how is this money serving the flow? When you pay for your shelter, bless the workers who built it. When you pay for your food, bless the hands that harvested it. When you receive payment for your work, bless the value you have provided to the person who paid you. Do not look at the transaction as a subtraction from the world. Look at it as an addition of value. Every time you feel the prick of guilt, stop. Remind yourself, my prosperity is a reflection of my contribution. My expansion allows me to serve more, give more, and be more. You are not accumulating for the sake of the ego. You are accumulating for the sake of the river. Like and subscribe to this journey if you are ready to stop apologizing for your capacity and start stepping into your role as a conscious steward of the infinite. You have learned to pause, to speak, to reverse, to receive, to embody, to govern the gates, and to serve. You have dismantled the ego's small, fearful definition of prosperity. But there is one final destination. All of these practices, the breathing, the words, the morning rituals, have been leading toward a state of consciousness where the you and the flow are no longer separate. We are approaching the final realization. In the next chapter, we shall step into the ocean of infinity where the river finds its rest. You have learned how to move. Now, learn how to be. The final threshold awaits. Are you prepared to dissolve into the truth? The journey concludes not at a destination, but at a realization, the recognition that the river and the ocean have never been separate. Consider a man standing upon the shoreline at dawn. For years he has fought the tides, bracing his body against the pull of the water, terrified that the receding wave would take his life force with it. He spent his days building levees of logic and dams of anxiety, convinced that if he did not manage the flow, he would surely perish in the drought of his own making. But today, he stands still. He observes the pulse of the tide, the rhythmic exhaling and inhaling of the sea. He notices that when the water pulls back, it is not an act of theft. It is the preparation for the surge. He looks at his own hands, the same hands that once gripped, hoarded, and panicked, and he lets them hang open at his sides. The paradox is finally resolved. He realizes that he is not a person standing in front of the river of abundance, trying to catch what he can before it vanishes. He is, and has always been, an extension of the river itself. The sensation of my money and the world's supply dissolves, replaced by a deep, resonant stillness. The waves touch his feet, and he does not flinch. He is the observer, the water, and the shore, all bound in the perfect, infinite architecture of the present moment. The struggle has ceased, not because the world has changed, but because the master of the world has finally arrived. To reside within the infinite flow, one must abandon the final illusion of the ego, the belief in a separate self that must negotiate with the universe for its survival. Why do we cling so desperately to this sense of separation? The why is the primal fear of non-existence. The ego defines itself by its boundaries, the things it owns, the things it earns, and the things it fears losing. If the ego were to accept that its supply is infinite and that its life is woven into the very fabric of the universe, it would effectively lose its reason for being. The ego exists to protect the me, and if the me is actually the all, the ego has no job left to do. The how of this realization is the ultimate recursive truth. I am the flow, therefore I cannot be diminished. Because I cannot be diminished, I have no need to fear, because I have no fear. I am the perfect conductor of the infinite. When you cease to identify as the dam builder, you become a clear channel. The reason so many spiritual seekers never reach this state is that they are still trying to get something, to get abundance, to get peace, to get security. They are still standing on the shore, watching the tide. To enter the infinite flow, one must step into the water and let go of the shore. You must recognize that the supply is not something that happens to you, it is something that happens through you. Your wealth, your influence, and your capacity to serve are not things you earn from the universe. They are the natural expression of the universe experiencing itself through your unique consciousness. The flow is not a destination. It is your natural state of being. You have not been learning to be abundant. You have been unlearning the habits of contraction that kept you from seeing that the river was already flowing through your veins. In the great archives of time, there is a story of a conductor named Elias, who led the most renowned orchestra in the world. Elias was a master of his craft, but for his entire life, he was obsessed with the individual notes. He analyzed every violin stroke, every drum beat, and every intake of breath from his musicians, terrified that one false note would ruin the entire symphony. He lived in a state of perpetual, high-strung panic, his body a rigid monument to control. On the night of the final performance, the performance that would define his legacy, the lights in the hall failed. The musicians were plunged into complete darkness. Elias, frozen by the fear of the mistake, felt the panic rising to choke him. But as he stood in the void, he realized he could no longer see the music stands. He could no longer analyze the individual notes. He had no choice but to rely on the whole. In the darkness, Elias closed his eyes. He stopped conducting the notes and began to conduct the silence between them. He stopped managing the orchestra and began to allow the music to play through them. The sound that filled the hall was not the technical perfection he had sought for 40 years. It was something far greater, a living, breathing, divine harmony that seemed to descend from the very rafters of the hall. The audience sat in a state of grace, for they were no longer listening to a performance. They were witnessing the symphony of the universe itself. Elias realized that the symphony had been playing all along, and his frantic attempts to control it had been the only thing keeping it from reaching its true, resonant depth. He stepped back, lowered his baton, and let the music lead him. He was no longer the master of the orchestra. He was the first member of the audience. You have reached the final gate. To live within the infinite flow is to recognize that you have already arrived. There is nothing left to attain. Your final practice is the practice of presence. For this day, and for every day that follows, whenever you are involved in a transaction, a conversation, or a moment of reflection, simply ask, am I trying to control the outcome, or am I participating in the flow? When you sense the old urge to grip, to hoard, or to worry, gently acknowledge it, smile at the ghost of your former self, and breathe. Return your attention to the center of your being. Feel the rhythm of the universal breath beneath your own. You are the conductor, and the symphony is already playing. You do not need to force the tempo. You only need to remain in the music. You have dismantled the prison of the myth of the finite. You have built a temple of embodied faith. You have mastered the gates of your own consciousness. You are now a conscious participant in the infinite flow. But the manuscript of your life does not end here. The transformation of your financial world was but the first movement in a much larger, more magnificent work. You have learned how to master the how of your life. In the future, we shall explore the why of your soul's journey through the cosmos. The river of your potential has widened into the sea, and the horizon is boundless. You are no longer the one who is searching for the light. You are the one who is shining it. The work is complete, and the new life begins. The ink is dry, the story is yours. Go forth and live the symphony.